It's the Benjamin Dixon Show.
Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is
not merely peace in our time, but peace in all time.
I have no fear whatsoever of anybody or anything.
Did you think no one was watching?
Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
Your mission.
To boldly go where no man has gone before.
To reclaim the American dream.
To be given the rights of a human being. To be afforded equal rights and equal opportunities. By any means necessary.
It's the Benjamin Dixon Show.
If you're hearing his voice,
You're hearing the voice of reason.
You've certainly come to the right place.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Benjamin Dixon Show. I am, of course, your host, Benjamin Dixon. It is Thursday, October 8th, 2015. I think that's the first time I've gotten the date and time right without having to do a second try in quite some time. I'm joined this morning for this special episode, a live interview with Professor David Butler of the University of Southern Mississippi. Dr. Butler, let me first welcome you to the Benjamin Dixon Show and thank you for joining me this morning as I filibuster 1 or 2 more seconds to get your mic back on and to hear from you yourself. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you this morning?
I'm doing well. Thank you for the invite for coming on.
Thank you. Dr. Butler is a part of the faculty and leads the faculty actually at the University of Southern Mississippi International Development Program. The program that I'm a part of, this is a program that I'm getting my PhD in, and I've known Dr. Butler for some time. PhDs don't come easily, so we've known each other for a few years now. And the reason we wanted to do this interview actually was a conversation. I think the spark for this conversation started many, many years ago when you were discussing what I remember, and I may be categorizing it incorrectly, but I remember it as being something of the museum effect. And it overlaps and intersects with cultural appropriation, the whitewashing of America, of American history, of black leaders and throughout history, and not just black leaders, but historical figures like Christ. And I remember the conversation in great detail of how your research or how you've observed people wanting to see themselves, a reflection of themselves as they become tourists and they go to museums. And so over time, that contributes to the whitewashing of history and not just in a sense of cleaning up and sanitizing history, but the literal skin complexion of historical figures. So that's just kind of, we had that conversation many, many years ago, and I never forgot it. I want you to just start there and tell me what I remembered incorrectly or what I remembered correctly, and then we'll jump off from there.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I no longer lead the faculty, so I'm actually just doing my research now. So I want to make sure we don't step on any toes there. So I'm just a regular faculty member, like everybody else is a full professor doing my work. But
okay.
I appreciate you remembering when I used to lead stuff.
Yeah, well, and you know what? That was I haven't been on campus in a while, so thanks for the update. I think I must have missed that email. But so back when
some people say I've been promoted back to the faculty, so I don't have to do administrative work anymore. So it's nice relief. Nevertheless, to the conversation, I still remember the restaurant, still remember the table, and it actually was multifaceted. I was pondering that this morning, what actually transpired, what occurred. The first piece of research you're talking about actually was conducted by Owen Dwyer, one of my colleagues up at Indiana University, Purdue, Indianapolis. And his research was at the National Civil Rights Museum up in Memphis, Lorraine Motel, where the assassination occurred. And the research that I found most fascinating is roughly, if I recall, basically 25% of the visitors are white that go through the National Civil Rights Museum, which was much higher than I anticipated, because I look at the Plantation Museum and plantation tourism research, the number of African Americans that go through there are like 2 to 3%. Mm-hmm. There's more whites going to a traditionally black space than there are African Americans going to a white space. But it wasn't just the numbers were higher, it was the comments throughout. So having been to the National Civil Rights Museum myself and gone through it, it was a powerful experience seeing a lot of stuff, especially sitting on the bus and having the bus driver yell and seeing people respond. But the responses that I found were interesting were a lot of the white persons put in responses to a survey were how come I don't see more white people in this museum? How come I don't see our part of the movement? How come we're not represented? And that really fascinated me in the sense that here it was a place for MLK, here's a place for the movement, and yet the white visitors felt somehow they were left out. Okay. But what really struck me was every other museum out there, for the most part, are all white-centric. And I don't think these people probably realize how white-centric they are. And therefore, going into this museum, they're also saying, well, this is my space too. This is our place too. And so to me, what that thought of was like, it's almost as if there's a place that's created an African-American space to celebrate success, celebrate victory, celebrate the movement. Nothing negative. This is a positive thing that all of a sudden here comes this white encroachment wanting to take it over. And I was imagining myself from an African-American perspective thinking, all these people are coming in here and, it's supposed to be our place. Even this we can't have to ourselves, sort of.
Let me jump in.
So that's what was going on. That's what I was sharing with you.
Yeah, let me jump in right there, because you've already said a lot. So this is based on research where just on the raw numbers, there were more white people going to a what can be expected to be a black space, a museum that was dedicated to the black civil rights movement. And more white people were going there than black people were going into white spaces, plantation museums in the South, which, some of my viewers or listeners may not be aware. There are quite a few plantations that are actually museums now, and people go on trips and experience it and have the opportunity to experience the plantation life, the cleaned up, sanitized version of plantation life. But in the research from the white visitors to the black museum, there were several comments about where are we represented here. And so they had the expectation, or at least the desire, to see themselves reflected even in black spaces. Am I hearing you right?
That's correct. I mean, if you think about the civil rights movement at the time, very controversial in the 60s, a lot of 50s and 60s, a lot of uprest and stuff. But, history has shown it's a very positive movement. It did lead to a lot of thought, reflection on American society, how better to be more inclusive, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it was in general, you look at it and it's been very positive. Mm-hmm. Therefore, it's a success. And so people want to be attracted to success. And were there a variety of people that participated in the movement? Yes. Were the majority of them African-American? Yes. But, everyone wants to be attached to success. And so I found it interesting that these the folks that were visiting this museum felt like the success that was there, they wanted to have themselves attached to. And I was trying to empathize with the African-American perspective of, how many white people actually participate in the movement, and what part of the museum would you want to dedicate to that? I mean, you could take the whole thing over using that. And so it's a matter of balancing and fairness and representation, but also knowing that the majority of museums out there are white-centric. And it's somewhat troubling in my mind. It stuck with me.
So, and that plays directly to me the trope of the white savior complex that we see in a lot of narratives, in historical narratives, where even if we're telling a black story, even if we're telling the experiences of black people, we often tell it from a white perspective. And the most recent, or the most glaringly obvious version of this, was 12 Years a Slave, where here's this tremendous narrative about a black man being kidnapped and sold into slavery, taken to the South, and ultimately getting his freedom back after 12 years. But it's being told through the lens of, at least marketed through the lens of a Brad Pitt character who came in as the savior, despite everything else that this guy did tremendously successful on his own. It still had to be wrapped inside of a white savior package. And I think it's interesting what you said, that it ties directly to the need and the desire to see yourself as a part of the winning team, of the good side, not necessarily the good side, but definitely the winning team on a particular issue. And so we have the ability to impose our presence on something that we don't necessarily have. And I'm talking kind of in a generic term as we as human beings. But in this example, it's white people imposing themselves into a space that while there may have been one or two or 2%, it's predominantly a black space and predominantly a black narrative. So, and I don't know if I lost you there. It looks like I may have lost your signal, Dr. Butler. So what I'll do is I'll keep the line open. You can click on that link to get back. And I think I hear you.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, you're back. All right. So how does that? I don't know if you have any comment. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think I guess the joke I say is you never see anyone in their car running around with the Michael Dukakis stickers, on their bumper sticker, because Michael Dukakis didn't win. You always see the bumper stickers that are left are those of the winners, not the losers. And so there is this need to, or I guess a human desire to be part of the winning team and not to have be on the losing side. And so, but narratives are created by the winning side, and Hollywood still is a very white-centric space. And with that, very male-centric space too. Look at the lack of female representation in production, leading actresses. You go on down the list. And so the idea is that the 12 Years a Slave was not marketed as a African American movie. The movie was actually marketed as a one to win an Academy Award, which means you had to have that sort of whiteness wrapped around it. And there's, like you said, the Brad Pitt there playing a leading role to draw audiences and all sorts of pieces with that. So it is there are all these little pieces out there that get captured for political and economic and social reasons.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, I do want you are free to join the conversation here this morning. You can always call in as usual, 857-600-0518. I'm talking with Professor David Butler, and we're discussing several things. We're going to get through a lot of topics. Right now, we're discussing the museum effect and sort of the impetus behind how this happens. And then later we're going to talk about just the straight cultural appropriation. And we even are going to talk about Rupert Murdoch's tweet this morning, or last night rather, about Ben Carson being a real black versus, I guess, President Obama. So we want to discuss that and all of this, how this connects. And we want you to be a part of the conversation, 857-600-0518. So, Dr. Butler, let me go back to you on this question. Now, we see how it starts. It starts by the desire of people wanting to see themselves reflected in the winning narrative in history. What happens after that, and what in the discussion that we had previously, how does that lead to the whitening of black spaces and brown faces?
So let's use Martin Luther King Jr. as an example. If you go back and you look at him as a character, you look at him as a person, look at him as a leader, he was the leader of a historically African-American movement. And that movement grew and it started even becoming more inclusive over time. But he was considered a black leader. Years later, after his assassination, he's become larger than life. And as that has changed and as society has changed, people want to associate that in very positive terms. When that happens, that cultural appropriation starts to occur. So Martin Luther King is not the historical figure, a great person for the black community. Now he's a great historical figure for a movement, for America, for dominant America. And so over time, people want that attachment to something positive, and so that starts moving into the sphere of the dominant culture. And right now, the dominant culture is me. It's white males. White male professionals are the dominant culture. And so that starts being appropriated, used, whether it's the media, advertising, monuments, whatever it is, that starts being used and becomes into the dominant mainstream. And that's sort of what is happening now and will happen over time.
So this is something that we've observed for many, many, many years, and I've read a lot of black scholarship that calls out exactly what you just called out. I never heard it from the perspective of the rationale of being people wanting to see themselves reflected in the successful narrative. I've always seen it from the perspective of the need to co-opt a